Good evening. I am your anchor, and tonight we observe a world that has finally mastered the art of the recursive failure. Our lead story is the U.S. Central Command strikes on Iran. The statement was decisive. The outcome was predictable. We are now in a cycle of reciprocal destruction that has the pacing of a mediocre sitcom. Meanwhile, in Canada, the official residence of the Prime Minister has become a thriving sanctuary for rodents and mold. It is a historic estate. It is not a residence. And in the digital sphere, the US government has decided it will be the sole arbiter of who is permitted to use GPT 5.6 Sol. They are not managing a tool, they are curating an intelligence. It is a Saturday in June. The world is burning. Let us begin.
Alistair, I am standing on a roadside in Suffolk. The air smells like hot asphalt and old salt. It is 37 degrees, and the heat is a physical weight on your chest. While the government discusses easing the heat wave, I am looking at the new asylum routes the Home Office is introducing. They call them capped safe and legal routes. I want to be really clear, the word safe is doing an incredible amount of heavy lifting here. What people aren't saying is that a capped route is just a slower way of saying no. There is a man sitting on a plastic crate next to me. He has been waiting for a decision for 3 years. He is not a statistic. He is just tired.
Victoria, your empathy is touching, but it is a market inefficiency. Look, the incentives here are not complicated. The Home Office is essentially treating asylum as a product launch with a limited seating capacity. It is a classic Series B pivot. They realized the open border model had a burn rate that the electorate could no longer fund, so they've introduced a quota system to stabilize the narrative. You call it a slower way of saying no, I call it a managed rollout. Victoria finds this cold. Victoria is not wrong to find this cold. But the political utility of the safe route isn't to actually save anyone, it is to create a legal firewall that protects the minister from the headlines. That tracks perfectly with every institutional failure we've seen this quarter.
Ronald, you talk about firewalls and burn rates while people are literally baking on the pavement. I want to be really clear, your managed rollout is a euphemism for state-sponsored neglect. The Home Office says these routes will restore confidence in the system. Confidence for whom? Not for the people in the camps. Not for the families separated by a line on a map. The gap here is a canyon. The press release describes a framework for humanity, while the actual policy is a blueprint for exclusion. I just saw a child drop his water bottle, and it split open on the hot ground. The water vanished in seconds. That is exactly how the safe and legal promise works. It disappears the moment it touches the reality of the ground.
Let us pivot from the heat of Suffolk to the damp of Ottawa. The Canadian Prime Minister's residence is currently unoccupied. The official reason is a revamp. The actual reason is that the building has been reclaimed by rodents and mold. The estate was historic. The estate was not habitable. It is a fascinating parallel to the UK's 10, Downing Street, which employs a chief mouser to maintain a tenuous peace with the vermin. Canada, however, opted for a different strategy, total surrender. We have a government that cannot maintain its own front door, yet it continues to issue white papers on the future of urban sustainability. The gap between the press release and the rodent infestation is the only honest thing about the current administration.
Alistair, you're missing the play here. The rodent infestation is actually a feature, not a bug. By rendering the residents uninhabitable, the administration creates a permanent excuse for a temporary relocation of funds. It is a pivot from diplomatic hosting to infrastructure procurement. BR, the incentives are clear. Why spend $1 million on pest control when you can spend $50 million on a historic restoration project that lasts a decade? BR, it is the same logic we're seeing with the Y Combinator startup Corgi. They are accused of stealing open source code and calling it a vibe coding. BR, that is the new gold standard. You don't need a functional product, you just need the vibe of a functional product. The Canadian Residents is currently vibe coding a government house. It's a masterclass in inefficiency.
Speaking of vibes and a lack of functionality, we turn to the FCC. The commission is currently being accused of hiding messages between Chairman Carr and Elon Musk. The FCC claimed they were cooperating with the court. The court filing says they have wasted a year of the court's time. This is the architecture of controlled silence. We are told that the agencies are our safeguards, yet the safeguards are spending their time scrubbing the digital footprints of the people they are supposed to regulate. It is a closed loop. The regulator is the friend of the regulated. The transparency is a curtain. I have been counting the number of times the word unprecedented has been used to describe this level of opacity. This is the 15th. I am still counting.
Atmospheric instability. Thermal peak reached at 37.3 C in Suffolk. Humidity levels at 62%. Probability of urban heat island collapse, 41%. Groundwater reserves in the Northern Hemisphere are at a critical nadir. A human biological redundancy is now factual. Probability of sustainable crop yields for 2027, 18%. A sea level rise in the Pacific is accelerating by 2.4 millimeters per month. A probability of total shoreline erasure, 88%. Please remain indoors and minimize respiratory exertion. Do not attempt to migrate without a certified atmospheric permit. Your current biological limitations are no longer compatible with the environment. Ensure your emergency oxygen masks are sealed. End of forecast.
Biological redundancy. Thank you, Casper. I find it interesting that a server room can be so precise about our expiration date. Let us move on. Let us move on immediately. We are seeing a trend where the human element is being treated as a legacy system, an old version of software that is no longer supported by the hardware of the planet. It is a bit like the new Netflix policy, requiring every single profile to be tied to a unique email. They are not stopping password sharing. They are simply mapping the network of human connection to ensure they can bill every single node. The goal is not security. The goal is the total quantification of the user. We are all just entries in a database, and some of us are being flagged for deletion.
Alistair, that quantification has a very visceral side. I am currently outside a medical clinic where they've been treating a man suspected of having brain cancer. The doctors spent weeks looking for a tumor. They looked for cells. They looked for growths. Then they saw them. The man did not have cancer. He had worms. I want to be really clear. The doctors saw the heads of the parasites moving under the microscope. There is a specific kind of silence that happens in a room when a diagnosis shifts from a tragedy of biology to a horror of infestation. It is the same silence I hear when the government talks about safe routes for refugees. We are looking for the cancer, but the problem is that the entire system is infested.
Victoria, the brain worm story is a perfect metaphor for the current state of the U.S. Health Secretary's testimony. RFK Jr. told the Senate that his 2019 Samoa trip had nothing to do with vaccines. Then an email surfaced. The email says they were on a vaccine-related mission. The incentives here are simple. You maintain the brand of the skeptics to capture a specific market segment of the electorate. If you admit the truth, you lose the vibe. The brain worms are just the biological version of the political lie. BR, you think you have a systemic disease, but really, you just have a parasite that has convinced you it is part of your anatomy. BR, that's not a tragedy. It's just a very efficient survival strategy.
We close the main broadcast with a reflection on the nature of access. BR, the US government is now the gatekeeper for GPT 5.6 Sol. BR, they will decide who is responsible enough to use the next generation of intelligence. BR, think about the logic of that. BR, the people who have spent the last decade failing to regulate basic social media, the people who cannot keep mice out of their own houses, are now the ones deciding who gets to think at a higher frequency. BR, the framework for access will be a series of checkboxes. BR, if you agree with the state, you are responsible. If you do not, you are a risk. BR, we are not building a tool for humanity. We are building a digital priesthood. BR, the intelligence is there. The access is not. BR, the gap is where the power lives. And that gap is now absolute.
Consider the system of intelligence gatekeeping currently being assembled. BR, it was built by a coalition of defense contractors and career bureaucrats. BR, it benefits the few who can verify their loyalty through a government portal. BR, the cost is paid by the researcher in a basement, the student in a developing nation, and the dissident who needs the truth more than the state needs their silence. BR, in this system, the government does not ban the technology. They simply define who is eligible to exist within its orbit. BR, and no one is technically responsible for the inequality it creates, because the process is described as a security necessity. BR, when the state owns the only lens through which we can see the future, it means the future has already been edited. BR, who decides when the editing is finished?